Hello, good evening. Hi, everybody. I should
Hello.
say good afternoon for anyone who's joining us from across the country, like Amanda in California. Hi, everybody. Feel free to say hi in the chat if you'd like. We're just going to wait a few minutes so everybody can log in. Thank you for being here tonight. Welcome, welcome. I can see people coming in. Say hi in the chat. We love a lively chat. If you have questions as we go tonight, feel free to put them right in there, or you can put them in the Q&A. I'll keep an eye on both things. Welcome, everybody. Hello, hello. Whitney says hi. Susan, Michelle, look at all these lovely names. I love it. All right. Thank you all for being here. So we wait for another minute or so. More people are joining. We're so excited for this launch. It's launch day. All right, I'm just going to hold up the book while we're waiting for everybody to come in. Look at this book. Look at this cover. I mean, it's gorgeous. I agree, Susan. It's gorgeous. Look at it. Mapmakers. I mean, did you invent this font, Amanda? I have to ask.
No. So the title, like the Mapmakers title, we actually got someone, our designer got someone to design the actual title for like the whole series, which is really exciting because he was basically saying like, we want people to be so hyped up about this thing and it to be this big thing that they hired someone externally, which was really exciting to get to work with another person. And then the like subtitle font is just our designer's handwriting too. So shout out to Patrick Crotty, one of the best designers out there.
Agreed. Patrick, well done. I love it. I love it. Whitney agrees too. I agree, Whitney. Okay, let's officially start this kickoff, this debut, a launch event today with us at the Silver Unicorn. My name is Casey Robinson. I'm the events manager at the Silver Unicorn Bookstore in Acton, Massachusetts. And we're very excited tonight to have both the author and the illustrator for this amazing new graphic novel series, Mapmakers and the Lost Magic. Joining us tonight, please welcome Cameron Chittock.
Hello.
Castillo, say hi.
Hello.
We're so excited. Congratulations. And today is the actual launch day for this book one. Yes?
Yes,
book one.
Today's the day.
Out today. Everyone can get copies. Everyone's cheering. I love it, the cheering in the chat. Cameron, do you want to tell us a little bit about what this awesome book is about?
Sure, yeah. So Mapmakers is the story of a young girl named Alidade who lives in a small town, but dreams of going out into the wider world. And one day she discovers a magical map that brings to life this blue heron who wants to teach her how to become a map maker, which Alidade is very excited about, but the local authorities, the Nightcoats, aren't very keen on her learning how to use that magic. It's a story of friendship between Alidade and her best friend Lewis. It's a story of adventure, and I think it's a story of learning how to go into the wider world with an open heart and an open mind. Written by me, illustrated, lettered, colored, everything by Amanda. Yeah, I think it's probably a good comp for anyone who likes Amulet or Avatar: Last Airbender or anything like that.
I loved the fact that, so I was just telling them before we jumped on with all of you lovely people in our audience. I was just saying that my 14-year-old grabbed this. She loves middle grade and she loves YA books, but she grabbed this before I could read it even. and she finished it in one night, which I think is something that often happens with really good graphic novels, because you can get totally absorbed in the worlds that graphic novels create. And this one in particular is so compelling. And I wondered if you both could share with us a little bit about what the process is like creating the world in a graphic novel, because I think it's a little bit different than a novel, and it's a little bit different than a picture book. So could you tell us a little bit about that process? Maybe Cameron, you could start talking about sort of how you formulated the idea and wrote the story. So how does that work with a graphic novel?
Yeah, so, well, for Mapmakers in particular, the idea kind of came from, I love fantasy books, and most fantasy books have a map, somewhere, some made up map in the beginning of the book, and it's very easy to kind of get lost in those. So, the original kernel was just, what if one of those was magic? Also, I have a truly terrible sense of direction. I get lost in the most just random ways and places. So maps have always seemed a little bit magical. So it started there. And then as I kind of, was starting to think through what would a magical map be like, how would it work? It really kind of became like, clearly there would be a connection to a certain place. And I was living in Los Angeles at the time, which is very far from where I'm from in Ohio. And so I realized, this is a chance to write about home. And that's where then it really started kind of coming together. And in terms of the process, I mean, one of the things I love about writing comics as opposed to prose is you can do a lot of this, world building stuff of, thinking of how the magic works or what the characters might look like or what their town might be like. But you're not trying to, like, at some point you're going to pass that off. And so you're really kind of writing at first you're really writing for your artist. And what's cool about that is you get very attached to this stuff, but then you get to let it go and let someone else take it and run with it. And then when you get to see what it looks like when it comes back, when Amanda has, taken what I've written and put in their own ideas and their own influences and the things that they're excited about, it kind of creates this totally different thing that is, in a way, very much what I wrote, but also something I could never have come up with on my own. And I think that's that's what's really special about comics, is that collaboration, and seeing something that, I mean, I think if you ask anybody who writes comics, what's the best part of writing comics, they'll say when the art comes in, when you get emails that have art, like that's the best thing. Because it's just seeing someone else take a kernel and just turn it into this amazing thing you couldn't have really imagined. That's the best part.
Can you give us an example of the kind of direction or the kind of specificity, I guess, that you would have included for Amanda?
Yeah.
Turn it over to Amanda and ask you to talk about what that felt like and where you went from there.
Yeah, I think that I always try and give them enough that there is something to get the ball rolling, and enough that you could get a sense of the feel that I had in mind. Or for example, like I think for the character designs, I really didn't say much other than I wanted Alidade to have a hat because I like hats, and that Lewis maybe should have shorter hair. I think, and then it was more of just like explaining their personalities and who they are kind of as characters. And similarly for the town, like, talking about the type of, I knew it was a fantasy world, it would be sort of pre-industrial, so there's no trains or cars or anything like that. And that, kind of goes from there. And I would provide reference, of images of certain things that might be, again, to just kind of get the ball rolling. But yeah, then it would kind of go to Amanda. let them run with it.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the world, in this, we get a little inside scoop, everyone, to hear what this sort of magical process behind the scenes to create a book like this. So you give a little context and key elements of personality and a flavor of the place to Amanda. And then Amanda, what happens? You go stomping around the woods and it just blooms in your mind. You take a shower and get good ideas like writers sometimes do. What's your process and how did you turn that into this compelling world that we got to enjoy? Just flipping to a couple of random pages. Tell us.
For sure.
Give us a story.
Yeah, so basically like in like what Cam was saying, where he was saying that like he's writing like for the artist. And a lot of the times when they start off with like my own stuff, I get kind of scrambled. And this is where collaborating is fun, where he gives me like a good starting point, and then so it kind of gets like my brain fired up, so I kind of have this direction to go. So basically what I usually start with, I think I started for this first book, I started with the characters, because it's like when I was first introduced to the project, that was like the big thing, where Cam was like, because I remember when I got brought on, he really liked the way that I drew characters, so then it was like that was important. So then I kind of just tried to picture what a kid would look like, with those specific personalities, and like how they would act and like what their mannerisms would be. And then that also factored into like how they dressed and like the way that they would like bring themselves up and all of that. So it was just a lot. For the characters, it was a lot of like infusing their personality into how they present themselves, not just into like how they like act or talk or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And then for the world stuff, that was just like a mix of just reaching into my mental library of things that I see are cool, things that I think would be relevant to like the scenario or like the world that he's setting up. So like this pre-industrial. And I remember being pointed into like certain directions towards like fashion sense and stuff. But I started out there, but then it was really fun because it's like this alternate fantasy world that I don't really have to like stick to anything that's historical. So then I would make like they'll wear their clothes in a certain fashion. So like they don't have to abide by wearing like garters or something like that. Like it's completely its own thing. So it was a fusion of like things that I thought were cool in my mind, things that I'd seen in history, or like just historical images and like art and all of that stuff. So it's just like a fusion of like a bunch of different things that, like, to put it short, it's just a bunch of things that I think were cool and like that I think would like fit in this world, because like Cam gave me so much space to like just do what I do as an artist. And like, I think that's part of the reason why it turned out the way it turned out. And it just works so well, is that like, there was a setup and then he kind of just let me run free with it. And it became something that was really cool. Yeah.
Cam, tell us about when you got to see the first sketches. What was that like?
Yeah, it was awesome. From like a sentimental point, I'd been writing, comic scripts since like I was a freshman in high school. And yet writing them kind of knowing that no one was ever going to draw them, because I can't draw and no one was ever going to draw them. So that, you write your whatever superheroes thing I was writing at the time, or Star Wars story I was writing at the time, and you write, you're like, wow, script. It goes in a folder somewhere and will never be seen again. It will stay. It will stay there, thankfully for everybody. So yeah, I mean, part of it was like fun. Actually, actually seeing something come back was very cool and very rewarding. And I think again, I do think there's something really special about when it comes back and it doesn't look exactly like you had in mind, like that, because it's not something you could have come up with. Like I don't remember what any of these characters looked like before Amanda's designs, and partly because it was pretty loose. But also when those character designs came back, I did have that immediate sense of like, oh, like that's Alidade, that's Lewis, like that's what they look like, that's who they are exactly. Yeah, yeah. And that was really cool. And I think that was something too. I used to edit comics, and so you're part of the team, and it's not everyone's always on the same page, or even books that do really well or creators that get along really well. Like sometimes that collaboration isn't always like totally in step. And I think what was really cool from when Amanda and I first started talking is that there was just a lot of overlap, and I sent Amanda this like really long document that like as I tend to as a writer, I will never use 5 words when I can use 15, and so it was this long rambling, this is the world, these are the characters, this is book 1, this is book 7, this is just like a whole thing. And when we were talking on trying to convey what I had in mind, and then we were talking, and Amanda like summed up the entire series in like 2 sentences better than I had done on like 9 pages. And I was like, oh, okay, like they fully get what I'm kind of going for, and also they're gonna like help me be able to get there. So the character design, seeing this come in, that was like the very first sort of piece of that, which is so it was, and it's it's the same for any, even like that thrill never goes away. Like Amanda is almost done drawing book 2 right now. So like, you finish book 1 and then you're back to new characters, new places. And every time a new kind of character design or detailed like design for a location or something comes in, that sort of thrill never really goes away, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
So the collaboration piece is new, or newer to, I talk to a lot of picture book writers, and the author and the illustrator don't usually talk directly to each other, which is crazy, but amazing and different. So can you say a little bit more about how and when you collaborated together? So were you communicating? Did you brainstorm on the phone? Do you, send sketches and thoughts? And did you, were you text buddies, or how does that work? I'm just curious.
Yeah. Well, I can say that like for our ends, like I remember when I was brought onto the project, one of the points that was made was that like Cam wanted me to be treated like a co-author. And so like collaboration was there from day one. Like it wasn't just like Cam was like, hey, I really need help with this, would you mind giving me some feedback? Like it was very like frank from the start that this was going to be like a collaborative effort. And like that's part of the reason why I was excited to join it, because I was like, this is really fun, because I just think when you work with somebody else and you bring both of your brains together to introduce each other to new stuff and like share ideas, and that's when it makes something like really special. So for like what we actually did collaboratively, it was like what I said, where Cam would have questions about script and stuff, and we would kind of just bounce ideas off of each other. And well, it was mostly Cam being like, does this sound okay, or does this sound like it could work? And then like I would offer feedback. But it was just really fun to get on the phone for that and just kind of like bounce ideas around as to what this world could be and like what these characters could be. And I think those conversations made it become bigger than what it initially was, and like just everything in the story became it just expanded, and just having dialogue and all like exploring all the possibilities is what made it like that was the collaboration. Yeah, to me.
At least once a script, I would throw up a flare of like, Amanda, I have no idea what I'm doing. I've written myself into a corner. The whole script's terrible. Please talk through my ideas with me.
Yeah.
At least once, which was very helpful. Pro tip to any writer: find an artist who's also a really good storyteller and can help you out of your problems that you've written yourself. Also, we have to give a shout out to our editor, Whitney, who was the one who paired us up. So that
Oh, she's on here, I think, today.
Yeah.
Hi, Whitney. Well done, Whitney. Well done.
I'm surprised she's not giving me notes in the chat right now. But I guess there's still time. There's still plenty of time.
I do think that the, editorial vision and the good books have editors and editorial teams behind them who get that the pairing matters and the synergy matters, and that alchemy that you're describing happens, and you can tell, you can feel it in the book. So, Alidade is very brave, and she has this big personality, and she's sort of teeming with potential right from the beginning. And you just want to know what's going to happen to her, with her, what she's going to do. Right. And then the way that the visuals and the, even the palette, Amanda, I was going to ask you how you chose that palette. Every choice, every artistic choice in this book brings her out as a protagonist, and Lewis too, right? And so you're just carried in this like stream of story all the way through. And I think that happens because of what you just said, the collab. It happens because of Whitney.
That's right.
Because that collaboration really is, it's magical. It's magical. And it's magical for the reader too, because what you're describing, what you two just described, I felt when I was reading this.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's exciting because it's like I like the whole process. Like it feels like, I mean, it's been 2.5 years since I got brought onto the project, and like to think about how much I've learned from this process, and like how much I've learned from like Whitney and from Cam and just everyone who's been involved, and like how much I've been introduced to, just like the different types of books and movies and all of that stuff just from the process of like brainstorming alone. Like it's always going to be like a good collaborative experience is always going to be like such an enriching one.
Speaking on new, discovering new things during the courses and about reference, during the first book, I probably included like dozens of Lord of the Rings references. I would include GIFs of my favorite scenes. I would include just constant Lord of the Rings references. And then at some point, like after the whole book's done, Amanda breaks to me that they'd never seen Lord of the Rings or read them. And all this reference that I was doing just completely
over their head.
But then they watched Lord of the Rings and it's great.
Yeah, I was changed. My eyes were opened. And I've watched them like all the movies like 3 times since.
But I in the second book, I promised I had no Lord of the Rings references in there. So
that's very funny.
Back in the third.
So we have a question. How much do the characters resemble you yourselves?
Maybe Kim can start with like personality, because I actually don't know that part.
I would say that Alidade and Lewis are probably actually this is kind of what started or kind of was the initial kernel of the idea, but they're both Alidade and Lewis are a little bit both of me. I think, like I said, I is definitely a part of me that has that sort of call to adventure, and I left home and went off to LA, and just that sense of wanting to go out and see the world and places and people and things that like I definitely have a part of that. Also, I am probably to a fault very proud of where I come from and very much a homebody, and would be very fine never to leave my house or my town or where I'm from. So I think like that, like, you know, part of the wanting to write about or write this story, and part of why wanting to have those two characters be the main characters was kind of me writing through all that. So yeah, so they both, I don't think I'm fully one or the other, but I probably have a little bit of each of me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I think for design, like when I was designing the characters, a lot of what I think about just in general with like my work, is just like what do I want to see, and then also like what do I like drawing. And I think like from a personal standpoint, being someone who's not white, and a lot of the times in a lot of just children's books and or just like illustration stuff, mainstream in general, there's a lot of characters that just are white. And I thought it would be something really special to, like, when I read the first script, like the first draft, seeing how Alidade acted and like thinking about how I was when I was a kid. And I was like, I was wild and spunky like she is. And it just felt special to see, even though she didn't have a face attached to her yet, just seeing a kid like that and just like having that resonation with her. And part of me felt like there's also kids out there that would benefit from seeing like or like resonating with her too. So that really like fueled how she looks, also how she dresses. Like I mean, like I think Cam pointed it out that she's very like down and dirty in the mud type of kid, not afraid to get dirty. And then Lewis is
There's her dirty.
Quite literally, yeah.
Right there.
And then Lewis is like, well, I mean, like I got matching glasses with Lewis. He was more like the shy kid side of me, infusing like fashion sense and and like personal taste type of thing. And as you can see in I think it was on the promo author photo for me, I used to have blonde hair. So that at the time when I designed Lewis, that was also a little bit of a self-insert with hair color. But yeah, that's from my standpoint.
Cam, you had mentioned a little bit ago your editing experience, and we have a question from one of our audience members about how that experience as an editor has affected or impacted your writing.
Well, I'm a lot nicer to my editors, as nice as I possibly can be. Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is, you know, as an editor, you're kind of like the project manager, and so you have your you are working with everyone. You're working directly with the designers, the artists, the writers, and so part of it is you just get a better sense of how everything is made and how everyone works together. But I think the biggest way it helped is I got to work with writers and artists for 6 years, and you know, got to work with people who were just really, really good at what they do, and so I got to, you know, into the writing front, I got to read scripts of writers who I really admire, and work with them and kind of see how they think and see what their process looks like. And that sort of, I mean, there's so much stuff, Mapmakers, but in everything I do that is things that I learned from working with writers. And then, you know, on the art side, I didn't really, you know, like I mentioned, I hadn't really had any exposure to actually working with artists or anything like that. So getting to work with them and just get a better sense of what do artists actually want in scripts? What is their process like? And getting an appreciation for how much more work it is. I mean, I think that, you know, I can write on a good day, you know, on a very good day, I can write, you know, 10 to 20 pages. And it's like, you know, for an artist, it's like, you know, each day is one page, you know, at best on like a, you know, really good day. And that's just, a different time commitment. And there's one writer who has said that, you know, when you're writing a comic script, you have to make every page interesting and dynamic, because your artist is going to spend their entire day doing that page, and you want them to have a good day. You want them to have a day that they like they got to really sink their teeth into something, and yeah, and also, you know, when you're editing, you just get to have really fun conversations about story and process, and, you know, what resonates with people, and yeah, you just, so basically I was a sponge for 6 years, I think, and of people who are way more talented than me, and so I just kind of try and constantly kind of go back to that, and try and learn from that, or emulate that as much as I can.
That's a good answer.
Yeah. And
I'm trying to be nice to my editors.
yeah, and like to add on to that, like hearing all of that, and it definitely showed. Like, I was really impressed by, like, when I would read Cam's scripts, how concise but like descriptive everything was, and you could really tell that he knew what was in store, or like what an artist's job entails for like making comics. And so it was really nice to have like structure, but then also enough room to like interpret things as my own, which was like, I feel extremely lucky that he was able to do that. And also it was nice to have basically a second editor on the team when it comes to turning in pages. So yeah, it was good job for your editing job, Cam.
Well, it was great because I got to do the fun part of editing, but not have to worry about deadlines like Wit. So I got all the stress of it. I didn't have to worry about it. It was great.
Amanda, how long does it take? I mean, so walk us through the sort of big pieces of what you do. And then how long did it take, for example, to do all these pages?
Yeah, for sure. So that was my first book. So that was like a trial and error type of deal. But usually like they set me out with a structure. So it would be thumbnails, and then the pencils, inks, and then colors. And so it would depend based on like how much time I thought that I needed. So the first book, it was like thumbnails were, I think, a couple months or so, and then the pencils and inks were 4 months each, and then 3 months for the colors. But I went very over, because that's the year when everything got thrown for a loop, and just like I was also finishing up school, which was like another huge hurdle. So I was working the first half of this book while finishing up my final year in college, which I was lucky enough to have a lot of support at school. So I think after all that, it took like a year and a half to finish the book. But I feel like the second one that I'm working on right now is a little bit more indicative of like what I can do now. So when I would do thumbnails, I could do probably like 8 pages in a day. But those are like really quick sketches, just getting the layout done. And then when I would do pencils, it was probably about like what Cam said, like 1 or 2 a day is like the good amount just to keep yourself paced. And inks is about the same. I found, because right now I went straight from thumbnails to inks just for like, because we wanted to keep the schedule a little bit more on track this time. So
you're talking about for book 2. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Because this one's more accurate, like it in like how I do my process now. So yeah, so I think I do like 1 or 2 a day. And then this time around we have a colorist on board. So it really helps speed up the process. But I think what Cam said about like a page or two a day is pretty accurate, because I think a page just in total time would take me at least like 8 hours to finish, which is basically a full day's work.
Yeah.
It's really taxing, but the payoff is always it's always worth it.
Well, and I love too what you said about being mindful of the story and its worthiness. You didn't say worthiness, but its worthiness to the illustrator. So having it be something that the illustrator can spend a considerable amount of time with and still love, right? And I think that translates, again, collaboration translates to your reader. Because if you are both feeling those things and creating something based on that feeling, then your readers are going to feel that as well. And that's, I think, another reason why this book was such a good read.
Yeah, I mean, you want, if someone's taking the time to read it or draw it, you want to make sure it's worth it. And also, I think with comics, something part of it, again, going back to like what makes comics special, it's a visual medium, but you get to dictate the pace by which you read, which is, compared to movies or TV or, I think the other visual mediums, you don't, it happens. And if you kind of have to just roll with the pacing that the story is giving you. With comics, you can sit with a page as long as you want. You can read a couple pages and then flip right back and kind of get those visuals. And so, yeah, I mean, I think you want each page to have. It's like you both want them sort of reading, like being so into it that they're just kind of flying through, but you also want there to be enough on each page. They kind of have to just stay back a little longer to appreciate that and see what we did over there. And yeah, and hopefully you get enough of those in a row, then you kind of get a good rhythm going.
Do each of you have a favorite character in the book?
Cam can go first.
Or is that like choosing your favorite kid?
Yeah.
I love them both equally. I would say Blue. I grew up. There was a pond in our backyard, and there, quite frequently we would see blue herons, and so again, going back to writing about home and all that, a lot of this stuff comes from that, and so Blue being basically taking something that was, this sort of like frequent sight as a kid, and taking it and making that magical. And he's also kind of a grump, which is always fun to write. I would say probably Blue.
Can you explain just who Blue is?
Oh, Blue. Yeah. So Blue is. I'm
trying to find a good picture of.
Yeah, Blue is the blue heron, which I'm not good at naming, and usually I pick a placeholder name that I then replace. But what happens, like Blue, I will come up with a better name for a blue heron, Blue. But then I just have referred to them as Blue for so long. It's like, oh, he's Blue now. I can't change it. So he is, when these magical maps, when they are done properly, they bring to life what we call memories, which are sort of the magical embodiment of that particular place that the map is the map of. And so Blue is the memory of the valley, which is where Alidade and Lewis are from. So he's kind of their guide. He's kind of their mentor figure. But I think part of why I like him too is we meet him in a place where he also has his own kind of journey to go on, his own things that he needs to learn, and kind of perspective that kind of evolves and changes throughout the story. So yeah, he's also, like I said, he's very cantankerous, which is nice.
Mine's probably, it's so hard to choose because like as a trio, I love all of them. But probably Lewis. I think I like Alidade has a really good arc as like a protagonist where she like learns a lot, messes up, learns a lot, and kind of has like this growth. But I think like Lewis as a character, he's like the homebody and he's the one that just loves where he's from, and also at the same time has like a huge family. They always forget about him, so he has like this huge coming out of his shell moment that like is one of my favorite parts of the book, where he kind of just becomes like the leader for his town. And like it's just really fun to see like a shy kid come out of his shell and then like come into his own. So I think that's probably why he's my favorite. Also, his face is really fun to draw. He always like Cam always writes in like the most exaggerated expressions for him. And it's just a lot of fun to draw with his big glasses.
We have another good question here from the audience. Wondering if either of you found anything in the book that surprised you while you were working on it by the time you were finished. I know sometimes, writers talk, pantsers who do not plot everything out sometimes are surprised mid-sentence when something happens because their character does something that they didn't expect. So I guess, were there any surprises like that for either of you in your creative process when you were working on this book?
The entire third act. And in book 2, it was the entire book that surprised me. That's a story for another day. Yeah, my process is very strange because I write what I think are very detailed outlines, which I think will give me a very clear, no pun intended, roadmap to follow. And then I write them, and I inevitably reach a point where I feel like nothing is working and everything must change, and what have I done? But book 1, there was just some of the I will not spoil, but some of the resolution and climax stuff was it wasn't quite working, and I kind of had to rethink it. Shout out to my wife, who is also a comic book editor, and so another person that I can. Well, unfortunately for her, I just constantly am talking about story stuff with her, and so she was kind of had one of the first kernels that kind of helped solve the first kernel is probably too small, but yeah, I vividly remember we were driving and I was stressing about the third act, and we were talking it through, and but I think it's cool because most of that sense of discovery of the writing would happen in the outline stage, that's when you're coming up with the big beat. So that moment where you're like, ooh, that's a cool thing, let's go with that. But that really never stops. You kind of get that when you're at every point when you're writing, and especially as you're kind of getting to the end and you have to bring it all together. So yeah, I think the final chunk there was a lot of stuff in there that I hadn't thought of, and it ended up being things that became really big for the rest of the series. So it was stuff that I did not have going in, and books 2 and books 3 are really, really integral, which was cool. And it also meant going, then you have to rethink book 2 and rethink book 3 to kind of get these things to line up and kind of keep going. But yeah, I think I can't say the specific thing without spoiling anything. But yeah, some stuff was a surprise and ended up being really fruitful for the rest of the series.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think also the third act too, because I remember when you made revisions and then came back, I was like, this is really cool. Like this is heading in like a really, really cool direction, especially with what you're talking about, that spoiler.
Yeah.
And like having something that will like tie into the rest of the series is always really fun. And then I think from an art perspective, for me, what would always really surprise me is like the way that I work and I like visualize things when it comes to thumbnailing out the script, is that like it just shows up in my brain kind of like a choppy movie, So it's like movie, but like comic book form, kind of like a mix of both. And there's some pages that like when I would read the description and what Cam would have written down, what Cam wrote down, like the way that my brain pictured it was just so cool and like fantastic that the way that they ended up coming out on page just upheld. And I think that like that excitement of being surprised even when it's coming from your own hands like happens multiple times, especially the end of the book. Like there's this one scene at the end of the book where it's like it's still like my favorite scene in the whole book because of the way it turned out and like how everything came together. Yeah,
We're gonna have a follow-up discussion with you both when everybody's read it and when we can all have a nice chat about the final act 3 with no risk of spoilers. We have one more question, which is a good one, I think, about sort of setting yourself up for the creative process. What do you consider when you're writing or illustrating for certain age range? So in this case, it would be middle grade. Do you consider story, mood, language, all of the above, additional things?
Yeah, the language for sure, and that was always something I was kind of a little, worried about of whether or not you're using too big of words, not big enough words. But I think in a lot of ways, I think kids are really smart, and they're usually smarter than we think they are. And especially with comics, because they have the visual cues from the art, I think sometimes we don't give them enough credit. And so, but for me, I think the biggest thing was I would kind of think about what was the stuff that I really loved reading when I was in this age demo, and what was the stuff that I maybe didn't have available to me that I would have really liked to read. I think when I was, the graphic novel space is so different now. I mean, middle grade is like this behemoth, and there's so many awesome books out there of every genre. And I'm sure there were to some extent when I was a kid too, but it definitely wasn't as broad and accessible as it is now. And I really loved, fantasy stories and loved, these trilogies with a sense of scope, and magic and all that. But there wasn't one that is, even though comics was my favorite thing to read and engage with, there wasn't something that kind of ticked all those boxes. And so I think part of the thing I kept coming back to would be like, would 12-year-old Cam have liked this? And then also, thinking of maybe 12-year-old Cam wouldn't, like maybe 12-year-old Cam would have preferred X, Y, or Z, but I think it might have been good for 12-year-old Cam to have read something like this, or to see a character like this. And so I you kind of try and thread it, writing with your past self of like, how do I capture that imagination and those interests that I had, and also how do I kind of give something new and something different and something that maybe is not what I would have expected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I think for me, like in terms of like illustrating, I think it's just also like a general thing about like my work. But I think like what Cam said, like thinking about what I looked at when I was a kid, and like I read like my fair share of like newspaper comics, and like I read like a lot of Japanese manga, because that's what I had access to. And I think one of the things that really stuck with that, or like from all of that, was just like the expressiveness. And I think like I think about how just people in general respond really well to like characters that are so expressive, and I think like kids especially think that's a lot of fun. So like considering that and like how they express themselves, and also like showing like a range of emotions, is also like really good. I think that like I would want kids to see that, because it's like when you're still kind of growing and developing, like being able to see a character that can express in various ways is always really good and reaffirming. And then coming back to that color question you had, I
About the
think
palette.
like, yeah,
Yes.
about the
Yes.
palette, because mood for me is very, very important. And I think back a lot on like animated movies and all of that stuff, and like how does the color affect the mood. So then I just think like it's like what I said, how in my brain it's like a comic book movie, like that's how I envision it. So usually I kind of read and then I respond to how the scene feels and like how it makes me feel, and like what description Cam gives to like kind of set the whole tone and the whole mood of it. And then I kind of go off of that. Like there's the typical like blue is more somber, the like orange is warmer, like that kind of deal. But then I lean a little bit more. So like with the first, like with this book, they live in like this place that's very down to earth and like very nature, like in the woods and like all of that stuff. So like everything was kind of skewed a little bit more towards like earth toned, more muted to kind of resemble like the lifestyle that they have in their village Alden. And then just like shifting it when things when like characters have like revelations, or when there's special moments where you want it to feel like it's just more important. So it's like tiny stuff like that that I factored in, and all while still trying to make sure that the palette was like colorful enough and that it would be read well enough, and just interesting enough to look at. Yeah.
Kind of want to hang out in your brain for a bit.
Yeah, sometimes it surprises me the way that it works.
Before I forget, I'm just going to put a link to in the chat to buy in case anybody wants to purchase a signed copy. Cam was nice enough to come into the store this weekend and sign copies. I wanted to ask you one more question before we wrap up. And if anybody has additional questions, throw them in the chat because we have a few minutes. So one of the things I loved most about the book, in addition to the characters, I did love the characters, is the sort of, I guess it's like the theme or the overall message. I don't mean message in a didactic way, but the takeaway, the feeling of the takeaway of this book was the importance of doing what's best for the common good. And that was such an unexpected lift, I think, in the narrative. And it just, it makes you feel all warm, because what's a better book to read right now than something that talks or shows, kids, the characters doing something for the common good. So I wondered, Cam, was that in your mind, that piece, when you started writing it? I mean, is that something that sort of developed as part of your process, or I guess I'm wondering where that came from. If you know.
I don't know. I honestly, I don't know that I would be able to write something that doesn't have that. It's some part of it. The stories that have always resonated with me, whether it's, something as lighthearted as Calvin and Hobbes, or Lord of the Rings, or what have you, involves people who care about one another and who care about their community or the people around them. So I think, whether it's a big adventure story or a kid playing with his imaginary tiger or whatever, I think that kind of story is always the type of thing that resonates with me, and that I, like you said, you get that feeling of that sort of lift. I think, and I think the thing about it too is it doesn't necessarily always have to be stories that are, overly there can still be stories that are darker or more serious or tragic. And I think that, that a lot of my favorite stories are tragic or have some sadness to them, but you can still be able to get that lift from that sense of caring for one another and caring for your community. That just always has resonated to me and with me. And again, it's probably partly part of where or a cause from where I'm from. So yeah, I think that was definitely there from the beginning, and definitely something that I wanted to explore from the beginning for sure. I'm glad that landed.
It worked. We have one more question. Wondering if any of your characters in Mapmakers remind you in any way of the characters that you read as a kid in comics.
Amanda, do you?
I'm looking back at the books that I have on my shelf. I'm not sure.
I think there's probably for me that I don't think there's necessarily a one-to-one, but I mean, influences are funny because you like the things that were in my head is like, these are the touchstones for writing this book. At the start, those aren't necessarily the same ones that you have at the end, probably because you're reading new things or you're remembering different things from when you were a kid, or you're in a different, you yourself have kind of grown or changed in that time between. So I think your influences are the particular characters, the particular stories that are kind of feeding your imagination at a given point are always constantly kind of changing a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I mean, in terms of the comics I loved as a kid, I loved Calvin and Hobbes. I loved, I have a very, very big soft spot for Spider-Man. So there's surely some Peter Parker in various ways, in probably Alidade and Lewis to an extent for sure. So I think all of that kind of comes in. There wasn't, I wouldn't say necessarily a one-to-one, but I think all of that kind of gets fed in as I kind of work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can't really think of anyone specifically, and I think that's part of the reason why I always get so excited when I like think about them. And like when I was reading the book is because it felt, to me personally, like from what I've read, it felt new and they felt like they were themselves, and like their own thing. And like I think there's always like this spunky hero that's like always raring to go, but to have it circle back to just like she also cares about like where she comes from and she also loves this place, that felt really refreshing. And it felt it just really gave her like a complexity as to who she is as a character. And I think yeah, so like I can't really think of anyone specific, but I think in that sense it's kind of good and exciting because it makes me like excited about the characters as like individuals. Yeah.
Yes, and it makes me excited for the next books. Speaking of, tell us when we can read. So book number 1, Amanda was finishing college while she was working on. Book number 1 has come out and she is finishing book 2 as we speak, correct?
Yes.
And so when do we get to buy book 2?
I think sometime next year, hopefully, if everything goes all according to plan, sometime next year.
Okay.
In theory, you get to get book 1 this year, book 2 next year, book 3 the year after.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So hopefully that'll all stay on track so that you can keep it like a yearly thing for the next few years.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Good. Well, we are just about out of time. I'm so grateful. So a book launch is a big deal. A debut launch is an even bigger deal. So the fact that you're both here with us with the Silver Unicorn bookstore tonight is such an honor. It's such a treat to get a window into your creative process and your hearts. It's very obvious that, that the reason that we readers who have read this have been lucky enough to read this already felt the things we did is because you both very consciously put those things, your big old hearts, into your creative work. And it's important. It's important that we do that as creators for kids. So thank you so much, both of you, for being here tonight. Thank you for making this wonderful book, Mapmakers and the Last Magic. Go grab your copies. We have signed copies, the Silver Unicorn Bookstore in Acton. You can also get them online at silverunicornbooks.com or at your favorite local indie store. Thank you both so much. And thank you everybody who joined us tonight for supporting independent bookstores and important creators for kids like Amanda and Cam. We appreciate
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you so much for hosting.
Thanks everyone for coming. We saw all the names.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Whitney.
Thank you, Whitney. As always, thank you, Whitney.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.